So you just want to be prepared and ready to answer whatever questions that may come up. And there might be some hard ones, or they might ask you like, what have you been doing during the pandemic? You know, what have you, how have you captured or gained new knowledge and so forth. So you need to be very prepared and ready to respond to those types of questions. Tip number 6, practice your responses, but don't memorize them. It's an important thing that we just keep our responses simple, but really to the point and concise, and make sure that it's clear and that the interviewer understands what you're trying to articulate to them. So their STARS, and I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with this, it's an acronym, but you want to provide them with a situation, give them a little scenario, an example of, you know, what you have done, then tell about the tasks, what responsibilities and which situations have you been in, and then actions. Explain how you addressed whatever the circumstances or situations were. And then results. What happened? What was the outcome? You know, so you want to make sure that you give lots of critical answers with the STARS acronym, because that's going to be very helpful to you in the end. And so you want to practice, rehearse, but don't memorize, because what if the interviewer asks you a different question and you've had this memorized response, and it's a good one, but it doesn't fit the situation or the scenario. So you just want to be able to be a little flexible and so forth. Be yourself and have fun. Now this is where people can express themselves, show their positive sides, their creative side. It's a blank slate. You just want to make sure that you are communicating and expressing why you're the person for the role and why they should select you. And you want to have fun doing that. You know, if you're passionate, like I'm passionate about human resources, and when I interview, or if even with a client that I'm trying to engage with and have a contract with, I tell them how passionate I am about being in HR and what I've done over the years. And, you know, I like to have fun in the work environment and so forth, and how I engage with people and all of that. So my personality kind of comes out with that. And, you know, I've had just different scenarios where people say, I can see that you're really passionate about human resources and what you do. So it could be, you know, if you're in customer service and you can express like, oh, all my customers were satisfied, and let me tell you why they were satisfied. And that's going back to the STARS. If you can give examples like that, that's going to take you a long way. So you want to have fun. You want to, you know, just be yourself, be authentic, you know, always smile periodically. I know everybody's not a smiler, but just try to be engaging and nod and, you know, just interact in a positive way. So, tip number 8 is if there's any, I'm sorry, did I skip a tip? Nope. 7 is be yourself. Okay. 8 is immediate follow-up. Now you've had all these questions, and maybe you've like felt like maybe you stumbled on a question or you didn't clearly answer it. You can ask them if if you've outlined or you've articulated the correct way, or are there any red flags that you see in reference to some of my responses that I provided, if you could, just kind of clearly evaluate that or tell me about a little bit about that, I would love to clear that up. Also, you want to always ask about next steps. What's the next step for the process, in the interviewing process? Okay, we've had the telephone interview, and this is stuff you're rehearsing in your mind. Okay, we've had the virtual interview. How many other interviews will there be? Will there be 2 interviews? Or, are they going to decide after this interview with you? You really kind of want to know what the whole process is going to be moving forward. Then you also want to send a thank you note via email. Now, you might have had a panel interview with different people, and now, because we're in the pandemic, you may not have business cards and so forth. What you can do are 1 or 2 things. You can ask the interviewer to put their information in the chat, or you can ask the recruiter to provide you with all of their contact information so that you can send individual emails to those people. And I say individual because in the past, I have seen people who have interviewed who have not gotten business cards. They don't even remember half the people's names. And they'll send me an email that says, oh, thank Julie, Bob, and Ted for the great interview. Could you pass this along to them? So that's not a good way of handling that. So please make sure you get that information. Either ask the recruiter for all the contact information, or if you're interviewing, ask them if you can put it in the chat. You can take a picture of the chat, so that you can follow up with them. I think they will think that you're being very proactive, and people like to see thank yous. They want to know that you appreciated their time and that you wanted to, you really want to work for the organization. And then one other thing you should do is always remember that you are a great candidate and that you can add value to their organization. You have to come in believing that from the start of the telephone interview to the start of the virtual interview, all your responses, you have to believe that in your heart of hearts, that you are the individual that they need to choose because you bring value. You have the skills, the abilities, and the know-how and knowledge that is needed to perform that job. So you want to be confident about all of those things. So I know I went through the tips relatively quickly. So let's see. Let's kind of review what we learned today about interviewing virtually. Test your technology, right? So we're going to test our technology in advance 24 to 48 hours before we are prepared to go for the interview. We want to prepare to be seen in the video. So whatever media platform it is, you want to make sure that it works, the technology works, that you have your environment set up accordingly, that your space is not cluttered. I just tell you a little story that I had. I was interviewing someone and they were on a Zoom, and the Zoom, they were behind or in front of a refrigerator. So I was thinking that's a little odd, but okay. So it's important where you're going to interview and what's your background's going to look like, because you don't want to have a refrigerator. You don't really want to have too much personal information, like family photos. I know that's sometimes a big challenge for some people. You typically wouldn't have family photos out, or, you know, if you're in front of that bookcase, you don't want to have any anything that identifies your political beliefs or your religion beliefs. So you kind of want to make sure it's a little bit vanilla. Like on my bookshelf, I have a dictionary. You can't go wrong with a dictionary, I think, in some other books. But you just want to make sure that you're kind of prepared to be seen on the video. You want to make sure that there's no distractions. There's not a whole lot of clutter in your screen area. So number 3, be a friendly guest. Always smile, always kind of nod and articulate what your views are, or to the questions and so forth. You want to always present yourself in the best light. Focus on your communication. Make sure you communicate effectively with the recruiter or the hiring manager or those that you're interviewing with. Let them know that you're very interested in the opportunity and why. You don't want to be arrogant, but you do want to express you want to express yourself in a manner which conveys that, yes, I'm very interested in this role. I know I can do it, and I'm the one you should hire. Be prepared. Always be prepared. Do your research. Make sure that you know about the company. You can even look up on, you can Google people, you can go on LinkedIn and find out a little bit more about them, and where they've kind of, you know, what their background is, their education, things like that. And that can be a conversation starter as well. And especially if you're connected with different universities or you know, organizations that you belong to, or you volunteer for the same place, you can kind of bring that up. So be prepared. Practice, but don't memorize. You want to practice over and over and over again, you know, so that you're prepared, you're knowledgeable, you know what the job description says, you know where your strengths lie, you know, you just want to sell yourself, so you want to practice. Tip number 4, be yourself and have fun. As I said, you just want to make sure that it's going to be a good place for you to work, that you're going to have, be yourself, and you're going to have fun. So you want to make sure of that. So ask all the pertinent questions. Also, immediately follow up. So you have a few things that you need to do in reference to follow-up, right? We talked about kind of asking about any red flags, or asking if you've communicated effectively about your skills and your background. You want to talk about that. You want to also send an email to individuals separately, and you want to make sure you know what the next steps are in the process. And so if they tell you the next step is, oh, we should get back to you in about a week, it is within your right to follow up, call them, email them, to say, hey, I'm really interested in this opportunity. I just wanted to know if there's a status. And, you know, they'll provide that to you, or they might be delayed, but at least you know. A lot of times employers are so busy, they don't always get back to you. So it's okay if you are proactive in finding out what's going on with the role. Any questions?
Hi, Francis.
Yes.
You can hear me? Yeah, there were some questions in chat, which I can go over with mine. First off, someone just wanted to know about your video, your background behind you. Is that a wall?
It is. It's just a wall, plain white wall.
Okay. So that's probably a good, you mentioned a plain background, so that's good. Then there were a couple questions about thank you notes and written versus an email thank you note. You recommended an email thank you note, but is it okay to send a written thank you note, do you think?
Well, right now, because typically that would be fine to do a written one, but because of the pandemic, there's maybe not a way to get it to an office, especially if an office is not open right now. So that's why I recommended the email. But if the office is open, you can certainly send it, you know, send a note that way. That's a nice personal touch.
Thanks. And then someone asked, it was me actually, is it okay in your thank you note to maybe go over some of your skills or background, or is that not a good idea?
No, that's a very good idea, because you can kind of personalize the thank you note and say, you know, for example, if you discussed a particular aspect of the position, you can reiterate, you know, the reason I feel that I'm, you know, versed at this or good at this is because, and then you can certainly lay that out for individuals and so forth, so that they know that your skills are strong in that particular area.
Okay. Then there's another question about how many questions, you know, you're always supposed to ask the interviewer some questions, and how many do you think are good to ask? Is there a number, maybe the types of questions which are good to ask?
I don't know if there's a number, but you should at least ask at least one question. I know in the past I have asked people, do they have any questions? And they are silent. You should always ask a question, because I'm sure the interviewer has not given you all the information, or maybe they forgot to say something, or you need to have some type of question. If it's, I mean, as simple as, you know, what are the next steps, or who would I be interviewing with next, or, you know, in my role, you know, we didn't discuss the expectations, you know, whatever the questions are, you definitely should ask follow-up questions.
And then here's a question that just came in. How many questions should you prepare to ask the employer during, I'm sorry, that's what I just asked you. How long should your answers be using the STAR technique?
Well, with STAR, you want to be thorough. You want to set the stage. So with STARS, it might be, you know, it could vary. It could be maybe a 5-minute answer, especially if you're going to go down all the steps, or it can be a 10-minute. It just depends on the question at hand. So if you have an example, I did a interview with a young lady who's trying to do some research. So she just asked me some basic questions. So she asked me to give an example. So I gave her examples, and then she kept asking me for other examples. So you kind of have to be prepared, because the first answer that you give may not draw out what they're actually interested in. So, you know, I might have said, she asked me about a situation where I had to deal with leadership and discipline. So I gave her an example about that. And she said, oh, that was a great example. Can you give me another? So I was like, okay. So I had to kind of really think quickly on my feet, because I didn't have a whole lot of examples, but I was able to come up with at least 2. And then she asked me other questions. So you just want to make sure that with the STARS that you definitely are thorough and you're answering whatever question they have posed to you. So it could be 5 minutes, or it could be, you know, 10 minutes, but you just want to make sure you get all the information down with that acronym.
I assume you have to make it compelling too, interesting and compelling. I mean,
Oh,
I've always
absolutely.
make it like a story, so, you know, people stay interested in it, which.
Yeah, you want to make sure that people are following you. You want to make sure that they understand what your example is and how, you know, important or effective it is in reference to what you have just said to them. So you really want to make sure you engage with that example. You want to make sure you're articulating the information clearly, and if you know, that they understand exactly why you provided them with that answer. So yeah.
Great. A couple more questions.
Sure.
They're coming in. How important is your body language in a video interview?
Okay, that's a good question. Body language is very important. That's why I am standing, and I'm gonna step back a little bit, and hopefully you guys can see. I'm fully dressed. Okay, that's number one. I have a suit on. That doesn't mean you have to wear a suit. I would try to figure out what the environment is. You know, some individuals only dress from the top of their head down to their waist, but you should be fully clothed. In body language, you know, I'm expressive, so I might use my hands. I try not to, because I know that's not such a good thing sometimes in an interview, but body language is very important, especially in a virtual interview now. So for me, I'm standing. So I don't have any pins or anything like that, because, you know, I can click the pin, and that, you know, that could be distracting. So I think just, you know, how you're presenting yourself, your posture. That's why I'm standing, because I have better posture standing versus sitting down. But so if you were an individual who needed to sit down, that's fine. What you would do is you would put the computer up a little above eye level, so that it forces your head up. So that's going to give you, you know, positive posture. So body language or body movements and so forth are very important in a virtual interview, because you can pretty much see everything. You know, in a face-to-face interview, you can also see things as well. But I think virtual is a little bit different, because you might have, you know, things behind you. You know, somebody may be coming in and out of your room, you know, so you kind of have to watch all those and pay attention to all those kinds of things. Hopefully
Yeah, someone commented saying, if you're sitting or standing, you should keep both feet firmly on the floor. So
absolutely. Yep,
like
together. And like I said, I'm standing, and I think I'm projecting even better when I'm standing versus sitting, because you're kind of sitting down. But if that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. That's why it's important to ask how long the interview will take place. Because if it's going to be a 3-hour interview, I'm probably going to sit down. You know, so you just have to make adjustments with your, you know, the visual piece there. So you just kind of have to kind of figure it out. If it's going to be a 30-minute interview to an hour, I would say stand if possible. If you can't, you know, sit down, make sure that you're seated and you're comfortable, and that your posture is better. You're not slouching down, and, you know,
Okay. We have a couple more questions also. What if you're having trouble thinking of an answer to a question? What should you do?
you can ask the recruiter or the hiring manager, can you give me a moment, you know, just to collect my thoughts real quick. I mean, that's okay to say that, because I would rather for you to come up with something positive versus blurting out anything, you know. So for you to say, may I have a moment? That's okay. I'm accustomed to that, because sometimes, you know, with questions, there's so many questions, you don't really, you know, understand half of them, and then you want to give the best answer. So just, you know, take a little time to collect your thoughts, and then, you know, move forward. You don't want to do that with every question, but occasionally, that's okay.
Shows you're thoughtful, I guess. You're actually can plan what
Yes.
you're going to say. Here's another question. How do you answer the question, can you tell us about your strengths and weaknesses?
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that is. Now, what I was thinking of for myself when I've had that question asked of me, what is a weakness? So right now, one of the weaknesses I believe that I have is not having a certification. So this certification is important in the HR world. It's not everything because there's plenty of people who don't have it, but I turned that weakness into a positive because now I'm taking a class to prepare for that. So even though it's weakness, I'm working towards strengthening that weakness. So you've kind of turned the narrative around there. Even though that might be a weakness, you don't have it right now, but you're working towards it. So hopefully that answered that person's question.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's good. And how about strengths? Anything?
Yeah. In strengths, I mean, tell them what you're good about, what you're good at. You know, I'm really strong at interpersonal communication. I love to engage with people. I connect with people wonderfully. You know, I have a approachable, I'm very approachable, you know, things like that. I mean, you can come up with a lot of adjectives to describe some strengths that you have. You just have to think about them, you know, and that's why on slide 5 with the questions, think of all the possible questions that they can ask you and just come up with some kind of situation or circumstance and then look up adjectives to describe those things. Who are you? Are you good at speaking? Are you good at, you know, connecting with people? Are you not so good at whatever? But how can you change that so it turns out to be a positive?
Yeah, you know, Francis, I love hearing from an HR perspective because I'm always hearing advice and interviewing from people who have interviewed before. So it's interesting to see the other point of view. Have you had any, I mean, with all your experience interviewing people, have you had any like really memorable situations, like crazy people or real unique people or?
Unique, well, yeah, I can think of one. I needed to find a principal scientist. How many of those are in the world? So, and I worked for a medical device company. So you have maybe 5 in the world, but with that being said, how do you attract that person to leave their existing company to come to yours? So I think that was a very unique situation, but you have to be creative. And you have to be able to, I think it was a connection that I had because I think I'm good, you know, that's one of my strengths. I think I'm really good at connecting with people and kind of laying out what the company can offer. So it took a while. It took maybe about 3 months because we had to convince this individual to come aboard. And that was one of the virtual interviews that I did. Like I said, in 2012, I started recruiting virtually, and it was primarily for individuals who are out of state or out of the country. But now virtual is just, you know, if you're around the corner,
Yeah.
you have to do the virtual. I mean, due to the pandemic. So.
Sure. So in that situation, probably the person you're interviewing knew more about the field than you did because you were just on the recruiting end, right? And he was doing the actual work. So that could happen to a lot of people, I assume. Is that like in the first stage of
well, this was initial stages, I actually emailed this guy probably for a month straight. We were going back and forth emailing, and then he said, you know, basically, I'm not sure if I want to leave or not. So then I was like, well, why don't we have, you know, schedule a telephone interview, just kind of find out, you know, you talk to me, you'll talk to the hiring manager, and we can go from there. And that's exactly what happened. Is after he talked with me and the hiring manager, that kind of piqued his curiosity. And so from there, I mean, he eventually landed the job, but it was difficult kind of pursuing, you know, candidates. So it's not always easy, because I think a lot of times candidates feel like the employer has the upper hand. It's not always easy like that. So I think sometimes the candidates have the upper hand because you have choices. You don't have to come to our organization. We wish you would, but you know, you have options as well. And you don't have to take the first offer. You don't have to, you know, everything is negotiable. You know, we have salary ranges and all that kind of stuff, but I think everything is negotiable.
And as a recruiter, do most recruiters, are they on LinkedIn now looking for people, or is
they are? That's a very good platform to use, is LinkedIn. I see LinkedIn, Indeed. Those are like the more popular ones. Sometimes I see Glassdoor, but you know, yeah. And if you don't have an Indeed account, I would certainly get an Indeed account and connect with people. Like I mentioned, there was a lady. Now I'm in this particular group we were in together, and we kind of connected, and now she's doing some virtual classes that she's presenting. So she asked me, and she's going to write a book. She's a PhD in California, and I told her about a California group that I happen to kind of connect with. So I mean, it's really, and that's really how you're going to get your job or land your job also, is connecting with people. So just even that connection, you know, we were in a group together. I mean, I didn't know this person or anything, but I've kind of shared some things with her, and she shared some things with me. She's writing a book. She's a professor. So, I mean, you never know.
Yeah. Here's a question that just came in about LinkedIn. Should we connect on LinkedIn with the interviewer? Is that a good idea?
Now that's a sticky one. A lot of interviewers are not going to connect with you because they don't want to seem as if they're giving you any preferential treatment and so forth. So you can certainly look the interviewers up. You can certainly look up the people you're going to be interviewing with, but I would not connect with them. A lot of times candidates would try to connect with me. I would not accept their invitation.
Yeah. Would that be a negative with them, or it's just?
It could be. I had a previous colleague just tell me probably about a week ago that one of the candidates that she's considering put in a request. And she said, you know what, I didn't like that at all. So she ignored it. So I wouldn't do that.
How about after, like say you were rejected, I mean, you weren't chosen, would that be okay, do you think? Or
I think if you're out of the candidacy, and maybe next week when Marty talks about it, that might be an opportunity for an informational interview to find out a little bit more about, you know, what they were interested in and why you weren't selected. They may or may not tell you that, but at least you can kind of ask about other opportunities that they might have. And they might think of you for a future one. Who knows?
Yeah. Good. Well, we just have just a couple more minutes.
Okay.
There was a question about practicing virtual interviewing, and one of the volunteers mentioned video stream as a resource to practice interviewing, which I haven't heard of, but and many college career offices use that as well. I know Zoom, you can just set up your own account and
Yeah, you can, well, through the Skokie library, you can do virtual, and I guess even for Wilmette, I haven't had any Wilmette patrons as of yet. But if you want to do mock interviews and so forth, they can certainly schedule that. And the Zoom, like I said, that's a free account. You know, of course, I have a paid account, but you can connect and you can practice over, you know, Zoom. So that's another way of being prepared and having your responses kind of practicing. So that's an option.
Okay, there's one, this will be the last question because we're almost out of time and it's a lot. This person's got a recent phone interview, which was a surprise interview, although a few days ago, the recruiter asked me for my resume, so they knew my email and phone. The interviewing person just asked me a few questions and then said that someone will contact me again, but a week later, nothing happened. I didn't have a chance to ask any questions. What's your perspective about this situation? So this will be the last question.
Okay. Well, if someone reached out to you and you had the telephone interview, either one of two things are happening. They're extremely busy and they couldn't get back to you. But I think all recruiters should get back to candidates, regardless if they want to move them forward or not. They should give them some indication as to what is taking place. So you can follow up with them if you have their contact information. It's not a guarantee that they'll respond back to you, but I would try maybe twice, and then if they don't call you back, just move forward.
Yeah, that's tricky. Just not knowing is one of the hardest things.
Absolutely, it's tricky. I think it's very rude and disrespectful for recruiters not to let you know one way or the other. That's what I think. So since our time is almost up, here are some articles for you for the future if you want to check those out. And thank you for your participation. Hopefully you learned something.
Thanks so much, Francis. I know I did. And your presentation, we'll email it out to everybody, so you'll have that.
That's great. And if you guys have any questions or anything, you can schedule something with one of the counselors. I'm one of many.
Yeah, Francis does volunteering one-on-one, and you can make an appointment and actually meet with her one-on-one if she's available. So,
all right.
And next, the free resource, use it.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a program on informational interviewing, so please join us for that. Francis mentioned it is a good way to reach out to people and get a job, actually. So thank you. Thanks, Francis, and everyone else.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Francis.
All right. Bye-bye.